glad that we can Zoom this and that there are many, many people who are watching on Zoom. It's such an important moment in the life of the family of the Hulkowers and the friends of Joan Hulkower and in the TBI community. This is an enormous moment, a moment of loss for all of us, but also a moment of celebration. Some of us might feel it more or less right now, but over time, over the time of the Shiva, in the Shloshim, the 30 days in the year, as we continue to reflect on everything that Joan Hulkower was and everything that she did, and the blessings that are in our lives because she lived. It's truly an incredible feeling to say that we knew her and that we cared about her and that she cared about us and loved us. We're going to begin with Psalm 23, and it'll be sung by Canterbury.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi Elohechsar, Minot deshe yarbitzeini, al mei menuchot, Yenaleni. Nafshi yeshuvim, Yanchini v'maglei tzedek, Leman shemo. Gam ki eilech begei samavet, Lo yivrach ki ata yimati, Shivtecha u'mishantecha, Hema yinachamoni. Ta'aroch lefanai, Shulchan neged tzorerai, Nishanta v'Hashem min roshi, Kulti revaya, Ach tov v'chesed yadafuni, Kol yemei chayai, V'shavti beveit Adonai, le'orech yamim.
A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want for anything. He has me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no harm, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Cantor Grander will now sing Eli, Eli by Chana Senesh. We just sang this at Friday Night Live, also in memory of Joan. Chana Senesh was born in Budapest, Hungary, not all that far from where Joan was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia. Chana Senesh made it to Palestine. It was before the land of Israel, was the state of Israel was declared a state in 1948. It was before that. She wrote poetry, she worked on a kibbutz, and then she volunteered to parachute into Europe during World War II to try to get important information as a spy to help defeat the Nazis. Her song, Eli, Eli, is about many beautiful things in nature as well as prayer, things that lift the spirits and things that inspire. And it's her prayer that they last forever. And as we think about those things which last forever, we also pray now that the good deeds and the love that someone gives in their life also continue to last generation after generation. Cantor Grainer.
Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol v'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tefilat hadam, hachol v'hayam. Rishru shel hamayim, berach hashamayim, tefilat ha'adam. My God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the water, the crash of the heaven, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the water, the crash of the heaven, the prayer of the heart.
In addition to Cantor Grainer participating this afternoon, I'm honored to be officiating the memorial service, and Cantor Blum is on Zoom and will be participating as well. I'd like to continue with a few prayers and readings. This is a contemporary reflection called Life is a Journey. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey. From childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. This is from the writings of Ben Sira. It's an ancient book with eternal wisdom. We are all destined to die. We share with all who ever lived and with all who ever will be. Cry for the dead, hide not your grief. Do not restrain your mourning. But remember that continuing sorrow is worse than death. When the dead are at rest, let their memory be a source of peace, and be consoled when the soul departs. Death is better than a life of pain, and eternal rest is better than constant sickness. Let us not seek to understand what is too difficult for us, nor search for what is hidden, nor be preoccupied with what is beyond. For we have been shown more than we can comprehend. As a drop of water in the sea, as a grain of sand on the shore are our few days in eternity. The good things in life last for a short time, but a good name endures forever. Shalom, friends. As we face this very difficult moment, I pray that we're granted strength and that the love that we have for Joan Hulkower will inspire all of us to honor her memory in days to come and in years to come. I'm honored to be officiating at this memorial service, the memorial service of a woman who was so good to so many. But like so many of you, and perhaps like all of us, I'm heartbroken too. It's so painful to accept the fact that Joan has died. And at the same time, I feel joy knowing that Joan lived such a good life, touched so many people, and gave all of us a view of what it means to live a full and rich and meaningful life. It's weird to say this about a 90-year-old, but Joan was taken from us too soon. And we all know that because just over 3 weeks ago, Joan was full of life and engaged in so many different activities. Just over 3 weeks ago, Joan was playing an important role on a synagogue committee. She was collecting tzedakah from the weekday minyan and finding wonderful and worthwhile places to send it. She was a regular presence on Zoom Shabbat services and our Zoom weekday services. And Joan was dancing. She was literally dancing. You could see it on the Zoom screen when we had our first Friday Night Live Zoom service on March 12th. I want to thank Seth and Daniel for sharing wonderful stories with me about their mother. I also want to thank Alan Bergman, who wrote a biography of Joan, which came out almost a year ago. It's called Joan Hulkower, Caring, Nurturing, and Loving. And if you haven't seen it, there's this beautiful picture of Joan on the cover. We will be selling copies of this book in the lobby. We do have the book in our library, and Daniel and Seth have said they may be able to make a few more available in the library. But it's a beautiful work. It was a work of love, of deep respect and admiration that Alan had for Joan, and it was based on many, many interviews. Many of these are direct quotes and direct memories from Joan. One of the last chapters of the book is entitled Journey, and Alan uses that chapter to talk about Joan's religious journey, from unaffiliated Jew with very little connection to her Jewish identity, to a committed and active conservative Jew with a deep love for the Jewish tradition, its holidays, and its values. It's a beautiful journey that took place over decades. Joan grew and embraced Judaism on her own terms, never in a way which made her uncomfortable. It was a positive reinforcement cycle. The more she embraced and learned, the more meaning and joy she got out of the tradition, which led her to embracing more and learning more. I think journeys are a good way to think about Joan's life. And one of the most famous journeys in the Torah, of course, is the journey of Abraham and Sarah. And there's a lot of parallels. I won't be able to cover them all when we think about Bernie and Joan and Abraham and Sarah. But sticking with Joan to start with, God tells Abraham and Sarah, God says, go forth from your land, from the place of your birth, from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. Joan too left her land and her birthplace for a new life in a new land. But it wasn't the call of God that sent Joan and her family on their journey. As they say in Israel, the hefech, it's the opposite. It was the Nazi invasion of Czechoslovakia. Joan Hulkower's birth name was Hannah Ruth. She was born on June 14, 1930 in Prague to Karl and Martha Eisner. A little less than 2 years later, Joan's sister Doris was born, and Doris is joining us on Zoom from California. We extend our condolences to you, and we also wish you a belated happy birthday. It was her birthday on Friday. We hope that you have many, many more years of health and good things in your life. On March 25th, 1939, the Nazis entered Czechoslovakia, and Joan had strong memories of standing on the balcony of her parents' apartment in Prague and seeing the Nazis march in the street. Martha and Karl, fearing for their lives, arranged to have Joan and Doris go on a kinder transport train. However, the train was scheduled to leave Prague on September 1st, 1939, which of course is the day the Nazis invaded Poland and World War II began, and the kinder transport program was abruptly ended. In the end, though, this was a blessing in disguise, because Joan and Doris were able to escape Europe with their parents. It was a circuitous route. They had to go up to Berlin, where they had a delay, and then they got on a train to go to Spain. And about 3 years ago, we had a special Shabbat in honor of pious refugee Shabbat, and Joan was standing on this bima and told this story. And one of the parts that she emphasized was when the train stopped in Paris. It wasn't a boxcar train, thank God, but it was an uncomfortable train. They were able to lower the windows a little bit, and a group from a Jewish social service program was handing out bottles of water, passing them through the window into the train. And that had a big impact on Joan. When they got to Spain, they took a train to Lisbon, Portugal, only to discover that the delay that took place in Berlin caused them to miss their boat, which was sailing to Mexico. Fortunately, the family was able to rent an apartment for 3 months, and they got on another boat. This one headed to New York City. And an incredible detail was another family was not able to get enough permits on the boat, but just enough for a young teenage boy. And they asked the Eisners, Joan's family, if they would chaperone him on the voyage, which they did. Amazingly, the family disembarked in Brooklyn nearly 80 years ago to this day. It was April 22nd, 1941. The family, which had a very comfortable life in Prague, settled into a one-bedroom apartment in Rego Park. And then Joan made another journey. This time, she journeyed on her own as part of a program to Scranton, Pennsylvania. It was to allow refugees to live with Jewish American families so they can have a fully English immersion experience. And this led Jo into the home and into the hearts of Lillian and Abe Gross. And over the next 5 summers, she went back up there. There was a camp there as well. And they really cemented their relationship. And again, I remember Joan speaking about this. There was a time not too long ago, I was asking congregants to tell me stories of acts of incredible chesed, acts of incredible loving kindness that you experienced. And at Kiddush lunch, Joan pulled me aside. She told me the whole story of the Grosses, Lillian Gross and Abe Gross, and how they welcomed her. And it was, again, a profound feeling. So much so that she made sure to stay in touch with Lillian throughout the rest of Lillian's life. The next major journey in Joan's life was going to Keuka College, a Baptist college in upstate New York. She loved her studies there. She found time to ski, and she even crewed on the Keuka rowing team. So early on, there were signs that she was going to love Port Washington. In 1952, Joan graduated with a BS degree in science and a registered nursing license. From 1952 to 1999, Joan worked as a nurse, sometimes part-time, often full-time, and she found great meaning in her chosen profession. The next journey was for a long weekend of R&R over Memorial Day weekend at a young singles camp called Sinaqua, located in North Westchester County. And this is really a great story. Joan's friend Renee had paid money to be there that summer, but the camp had a very strict policy that was for members only people who paid. So what they did was they got close to the entrance gate. Joan crouched down onto the car floor and hid. And it was successful. They didn't see her, and she got into the camp. It just so happened that a man named Bill Hulkower had also paid to be at the camp that summer. That was Bernie's brother, and Bill invited Bernie to also come for Memorial Day weekend. Throughout Joan's life, she did big acts of kindness and small acts of kindness. Our tradition teaches us we should never dismiss a small act of kindness just because it's small, because we never know what impact our actions will have on others. A very small gesture can have an enormous impact on others. And I say all this because Joan met Bernie over a small act of kindness. The first night Joan was in the camp, it was raining, there was a co-ed clubhouse, and one of the women in the bungalow said to Joan, when you get to the clubhouse, look for a tall man and ask him to come back with an umbrella so he can escort me to the clubhouse. Joan got to the clubhouse, she looked around, she saw a tall, dashing man, turned out to be Bernie, and he went and he escorted this woman back. And then he came into the clubhouse and he sat next down to Joan. According to Seth and Dan, Bernie dated a lot, but once he met Joan, he knew she was the one. They were able to date New York City for a while, but Bernie was in the army and soon he got stationed to a base in Europe just outside of Paris. Bernie then began a correspondence with Joan that eventually tallied more than 200 letters, and Joan kept those letters, and Dan and Seth have seen those letters. They still exist, and they're still in Joan's house today. Bernie and Joan came from two different worlds. Joan had grown up unaffiliated, and Bernie grew up Orthodox. But they loved each other, respected each other, and made room for each other. They had enough wisdom to know that they'd each found someone special, and they made it work. Joan and Bernie were married on November 20th, 1955, at the Roslyn Country Club. And following their wedding, they began their married life in the same apartment building as Joan's parents in Rego Park. In 1958, Seth was born. 3 years later, Daniel joined the family. Were you still in Rego Park? Yeah. So the next journey included Bernie and Seth and Daniel, and they moved out of Queens to Bethpage so that Bernie could be closer to his in-house counsel job working with a Long Island lighting company known as Hulkower. And then thank God Bernie switched jobs again. This time working in-house counsel for Con Ed in Manhattan. And this led the family to leave Bethpage so the commute to the city could be easier, and they came to Port Washington. The year was 1969. The week before they moved to Port Washington, they came to Friday night services at TBI, where they were royally greeted by Deep Lick, and they were immediately sold on TBI. It wasn't long before Bernie became the master greeter at TBI, an unofficial position he held for decades. In 2014, TBI as a community had the wonderful opportunity to thank Joan and Bernie for everything they had done for TBI when we honored them in our spring gala and gave them our Kihila Kedoshah, our Holy Community Award. Sitting down with Joan before the gala, she shared this story with me about their move. She said, we had come from the Bethpage Jewish Community Center where Bernie had been president, so on the high holidays we sat in the front row. But the first year we were at TBI, there were assigned seats, and they put us in the back row, and my boys were horrified. I don't know if you remember it that way. Although Joan continued to have meaningful and exciting journeys in her life, especially to Israel, which she traveled to, I believe, 19 times, in many significant ways, this is where Joan's story of geographical journeys ends. Coming to and living in Port Washington was the beginning of permanence, rootedness, and home. Joan and Bernie loved Port Washington, they loved TBI, and how blessed we are to have had them in our lives for so many years. Joan was fond of saying recently, I've been a member of TBI for over 50 years, and she would say it with such joy and love, and it's so sad to think she's no longer here. Over the years at TBI, Bernie served in many roles, including president. Joan was active, taking adult education classes, having an adult bat mitzvah, which he did with 22 other women in 1983. In addition, Joan was involved with sisterhood, and her favorite job over the years was chairing the Oneg Shabbat program, a little special celebration after Friday night services. Joan served on the board and the executive board. She always volunteered to help on committees, to run programs, and to decorate the synagogue for special events. Joan's volunteerism was not limited to TBI. In addition to many personal and private acts of chesed, acts of loving kindness, she was also an active member of Hadassah, serving as chapter president twice. Joan got turned on to Hadassah when the family went on a TBI trip to Israel in 1971 with Rabbi Ehrlich. One of the main reasons they went, not only to enjoy Israel, was to celebrate Seth's bar mitzvah there, which they did at a service at the Holy Land Hotel. When she got back to Port Washington, she wanted to join Hadassah, and she actually looked them up in the phone book and called them. Joan and Bernie went back to Israel in 1981 to visit Daniel, who was living on a kibbutz at the time. In 1990, Joan and Bernie made their first extended trip to Israel, where they did volunteer work. They continued their 7 to 8 week volunteer trips with an organization called CARI, Canadian American Active Retirees in Israel. Joan went with CARI 15 times. With these volunteer trips, Bernie and Joan served as role models for us, reminding us that loving Israel is not enough. We must financially support organizations in Israel And how wonderful would it be if we went to Israel like Bernie and Joan to connect with the people and to give back through our volunteer work. While many things gave Joan's life great meaning, family was the most important thing of all. Seth and Dan told me she loved her family so much, which is maybe obvious, but what's not obvious is that she loved all of her family. And the reason that's so amazing is that when she married Bernie, Bernie has 8 siblings, and there were over 20 nieces and nephews, and she had relationships with each one of them, connecting with them in special ways, and each one of them appreciating her. Joan and Bernie were wonderful partners, and they created a beautiful home. Dan and Seth said the home was filled with great harmony and lots of laughter. Bernie was fun, and Joan truly and thoroughly enjoyed the fun and laughter. Judaism, of course, played a huge role in the Hulkower home. When the kids were young, the deal was that every Friday or Saturday, they had to attend at least one of the Shabbat services at TBI. There were weekly Shabbat dinners and beautiful holiday celebrations. Joan welcomed Seth's wife, Lisa, and her entire family into the Hulkower family, and also with open arms welcomed Miriam into the family and loved connecting with her. She loved them both deeply and had very warm relationships with both. Joan was filled with joy and felt incredibly blessed to have 4 amazing granddaughters, Anna, Isabel, Talia, and Sasha. And Joan had so many special times with each one of them. And she had the great pleasure of watching them grow up and becoming amazing young women. And they're all here, and they're going to be speaking a little later in the memorial service to honor their Omi, their grandma. When Dan married Miriam, there was a bonus. Miriam's 2 children, Kobe and Rachel. And Joan had the wonderful opportunity to get to know them and form special relationships with them too. With Joan's death, there is a big hole in the Hulkower family. There's a big hole in the lives of Joan's friends, and there's a big hole in the TBI community. Yet at the same time, we are all so enlarged, so enriched, and so full of love, because Joan lived, was a part of our lives, and blessed us with her endless chesed. God said to Abraham, Lech lecha, go forth from your land. Our sages ask, why did God do this? Not just why did he tell them to go, but he wanted them to wander around on their journey before they got to the land of Canaan. And they come up with a very beautiful answer. They say, it's similar to this story. There was once a vial of perfume, and it had a tight-fitting cork on it, and it was sitting in the corner of the room, and so no one could appreciate its beautiful fragrance. And then a person picked it up, took the cork off the top, and brought it all around the room so that everyone can smell how beautiful it was. They say so too with Abraham and Sarah. They had this incredible goodness, but they were just sitting in one corner of the ancient world. And God said, go wander around so that your blessings, your light, and your goodness will be brought to others. So too with Joan Hulkower. She wandered. She was a wandering Jew for a while, but even when she was in Fort Washington, she was always out and about, actively involved in the community. And how lucky we are to have this incredible person with this great light and this great kindness touch all of our lives. Tehi nishmata Torah b'Torah Chaim. May the soul of Joan Hulkower, Chana Ruth Bat Ephraim Virginia, be bound up in the bond of eternal life. And let us say, Amen. We're now going to hear from family members, first from Joan's 2 sons and then from her granddaughters. And I'm going to ask as you come up to stand over at this table. And please adjust the microphone as you need to, so you can speak directly into the microphone. And for those of you who don't know, this is Joan and Bernie's eldest son, Seth, who's coming to share some memories and words.
Thank you, Rabbi Mishkin. Dan, I want to thank everyone who's with us today to recognize our mother, Joan Hulkower. I'm sorry we can't all be together in person, but I'm glad we can share this with people who are most important to her. This place Temple Beth Israel, this congregation, were, as you heard from the rabbi, so central to Mom and her being. I will mention, Rabbi, that we were in the old sanctuary upstairs the first time we came, and we were horrified not just by being in the last row, but by how many empty rows there were in front of us. Because being with Mom and Dad, we showed up at the beginning of the holiday services. We were there at 8:30 in the morning. The Rabbi shared with you Mom's history, and he mentioned we're all going to be plugging the book, the Joan Hulkower book. So if you're interested in a copy, please see us later about that. But I want to talk about who she was, about her character a little bit, the way she lived, and the impact that she had on others. Over the last few weeks after Mom had her accident, we received many notes and calls from people telling us about their connections to her and how they told us how they want to grow up to be like Joan. We knew she touched a lot of people, but over these last few weeks, I found myself thinking about what made her stand out. Mom entered every day with purpose. She was always busy and always trying to make the world a little better for her friends, her community, and her family. And she did it with a smile. She literally had no comprehension of the word procrastination. When I picture my mother, she's a blur. She was always in motion doing something. Hadassah garage sales got organized, letters got written, sweaters were knitted, patients were cared for, dishes were washed, dried, and put away. Last 2 points being a bone of contention between us because I believe that the drying rack actually served the last 2 verses, but for her, everything had to be cleaned away right away. She was only now beginning to think about slowing down. She stayed with me and Lisa several times over the past year, and she would inform us that she stayed in bed until 10:30, not with guilt, but with some glee. Mom was thinking of stepping off the Hadassah board, and she was planning on going to Israel again this winter, but only for 4 weeks instead of the full 6, 7, or 8 weeks. She was devoted to Dad, as he was to her. Their marriage of over 61 years was filled with laughter, and they were complete partners. They were each other's biggest cheerleaders. And then she held him and cared for him during his long, slow decline into dementia and failing health. The early stages of that was the only time I saw her get mad at him, but really at the illness that was stealing him from her. I should mention, by the way, that if one ever believed in divine providence, it came at that time in the form of a new neighbor for Mom, a nurse, Kathleen Melody, to whom we owe now a double dose of gratitude. Thank you, Kathleen. Mom grieved Dad's loss and missed him every day for these last 4 years. She also worked to reclaim who he truly was. Narama mentioned the letters that Dad wrote over a 14-month stretch while he served in the U.S. Army. Mom had kept those in a box for 61 years. And she took them out and she started to read through them again. And now we've started to read through them as well. She was sharing select ones with us. But last night we actually read the letter where he proposed to her. And then a following letter 8 days later where he responded where she accepted his proposal. It was all quite moving for us. Reading those letters helped Mom recall the smart, funny, and caring man that she fell in love with so many years ago. The pandemic was a challenge, and lockdown was hard on Mom, living alone, but she made the best of the situation. Here I need to thank her dear friend, Leah Shumsky, who has been such a remarkable friend over the past years, and right to the end. In addition, right at the beginning of the lockdown, Mom received a great gift and compliment. This book, available at bookstore. Working with Alan on this biography just brought Mom so much joy to be able to think about this She loved giving out copies to friends and family. She wrote descriptions in them. And she always looked forward to the calls after people had read the book to tell her what they thought and what questions they had. And I was chatting with one of her oldest friends, Ray Rule, about that. And Ray read the book and called up Mom and said, okay, I got 3 questions. And they went over things that happened back in 1941 when Mom first came to this country. Passover was Mom's favorite holiday. It combined 4 of her favorite things: family, Judaism, cooking, and cleaning. She was already in full prep mode. The menu is written out and is pinned to the refrigerator at home right now, along with a couple of recipes torn from the recent New York Times. She had already cleared out a couple of cabinets in anticipation of filling them with her Passover dishes and kosher for Passover food. And she was working down her stock of chametz. So much so that there were only 3 pieces of mango bread in the cookie jar, which was typically my first stop as soon as I came to her house. I'm glad to say that, like the Maccabees and their vial of oil, we were overjoyed to find 1 last loaf of mango bread in the freezer. Mom was a protective Jewish mother. She called the police once when I came home late from school. When my football teammates convinced me to play lacrosse, she asked, why not chess or bridge? I bought a motorcycle as I was graduating from college. She wasn't pleased about that. She denied arranging for it to be stolen a year later. The jury is still out. Mom prized her independence. She wasn't about calling me for tech support on her computer, and she did let me monitor her finances, but she was writing all her own checks, and last month we got into a very long discussion about insurance deductibles and why she had to pay anything out of pocket. She also called Verizon in January to complain about an increase in her bill, and she kept asking me why Apple was charging her 99 cents every month for storage. Over the past year, Mom and I spoke nearly every day. There were so many more things to say to her, but there was nothing left unsaid. Mom was a woman of courage, valor, and action. She didn't spend much time or energy on the question, why did this happen to me? Instead, her question was, what can I do to make things better? We saved the departed. May their memory be of a blessing. For Mom, I would say, may her memory be an inspiration. Thank you. Now my brother's going to come up and speak.
That would be Daniel Hulkower.
I'm far enough away, I'm gonna take my mask off. Just that said, we received so many notes from people over the last couple of weeks. It was just, just fantastic. We both felt like she didn't really know how many people she touched over the years, and it was an astonishing amount of people. But I want to thank Miriam and Melissa for the last month, 3 weeks, where they were just rocks, and we just, the 4 of us moved into the house, and we stayed there till the end, and they were just fantastic. My mother was too busy to linger, but she did take her time at the very end, and she hung in there for a few extra days after we thought really the end was imminent. And we were speculating that she did kind of like having the 4 of us in the house. She loved her family so much, not just the nuclear family, but her extended family as well. And family time was the most important thing to her. One of her great concerns was the inevitable decline that awaited her. The last 3 years of our father's life was torture for all of us. And but she was completely dedicated to him and cared for him like a trooper, never for a moment considering moving him to a facility. And we all worried about what the end and how things would play out for her. So even though this wasn't the way that she wanted it to end, the fact that it was fast is the only silver lining in this. It's a sad time for all of us because she seemed to have a lot of living left. And based on the aluminum foil and paper products in the basement, she clearly expected to last much, much longer. But it's hard to feel cheated, even with Joan's life ending so abruptly. I tell people that I've lived a charmed life, and it's absolutely true. And the reason is that I was brought into this world by two people who loved me unconditionally and guided me to adulthood. They brought different traits to the party. My father really set the tone for the family, but my mother was the backbone. Joan knew what was important to her. She was many things to many people: wife, mother, grandmother, sister, friend, nurse, volunteer, Holocaust survivor, and more. But one thing that really guided her was her Jewish faith, which grew much, much stronger over the years. She had a tinge of guilt for surviving the Holocaust and felt like she was put on this planet to make sure the Jewish people endure, and particularly late in life, spent much of her energy focused on all things Temple and Israel. When I think of my mother, I have visions of her face at different moments of my life. One of my first memories is of having an argument with her when we lived in Bethpage. I was probably around 5, and I decided to try out "I hate you," just to see how that worked. She stopped and looked at me, and she started to cry. And she just turned and walked up the steps up to the deck with me running after her, telling her, "I'm really sorry, I didn't mean it." I put that one away forever, and never tried it again, but I never forgot that look. I remember seeing the look of worry on her face after I'd been mugged, and when I was 24 and she came to see me in the hospital. And I remember when she and my father came to York, Pennsylvania, after I was first born. They just walked in as I came down the steps holding Anna in my arms. And the look of utter joy on her face as she greeted her first grandchild is something that will just stay with me forever. And what ties them all together was the complete love she had for her family. She was fully invested. My parents had a wonderful love affair. My father fell for my mother immediately and knew she was the one right away, but she also let him know her intentions pretty early. My father told the story of the first time they went to the beach together and Joan brought roast beef sandwiches. "I knew she meant business," he said. They were always in sync with each other when it came to family issues. They were a unit. There was no playing them off each other because they always had the same answer. They cherished time together and with us, and family vacations were an integral part of growing up in our house. Early on, they decided that skiing would be a good family activity. Joan was a very good skier. Bernie, with his Lower East Side pedigree, not so much. But he was game. Among our early destinations was Mount Sutton in Canada. My Uncle Bill found a lodge on the access road to the mountain where the 4 of us were in one room with 2 bunk beds, a sink, and a bathroom down the hall. Total cost for the accommodations, 2 meals, lift tickets, and lessons was $12 a day per person. We went there twice. Seth and I loved it, but during the second trip, my mother turned to my father and said, "This is not vacation to me." The next year, through some lucky circumstances, we ended up in a ski-on, ski-off condo, and our ski lives got a huge upgrade and changed for the better forever. The only time they had really any sustained conflict in their marriage was when Bernie retired, and they were in each other's way in the kitchen. My mother solved that problem and gone back to work for 10 years. On the day she had surgery, we were able to get into the emergency room to be with her for about half an hour before they took her in. I told her about a recent dream I had where Dad came and visited me by running over and giving me a big hug. She told us that she often felt his presence in the house, where she would be in a room and feel like he was next to her. They were connected in life and beyond. Joan rose to leadership roles in whatever endeavor she got involved in, but rarely was the head of the organization. She was more a cog that kept things moving forward. She was on numerous volunteer boards, was the head nurse for many years at both Forest Hills General and Manhasset Hospital. She was incredibly competent and was someone who got things done. She was a linear thinker and very task-oriented, and incredibly energetic, a combination of traits that allowed her to accomplish many tasks at a rapid pace. Being a linear thinker led her to be very orderly. She kept a very organized house and immaculate records of everything. A couple of years ago, I had an issue where I needed to refer back to the surgery report I had for an operation I had in 1986. I was an adult living on my own at the time, was old enough to know I should file it away, but of course hadn't. So I called her to see if she had a copy. She found it in 5 minutes. But there was a price to her orderliness. She needed to have her email inbox empty at the end of every day. Would get agitated if she got too many emails in a particular day. She even took to cleaning out her sent box. And once she discovered she was able to do so, until Seth finally put his foot down. And she was interested in Facebook, but couldn't stick with it because it generated too many notifications. There were things she couldn't understand. She was incredibly steady and was the same every day, although she claimed that she didn't like November and the month made her depressed. She didn't understand moody people, and she definitely didn't understand mental illness, or why some people couldn't get things done quickly. She also couldn't understand why you would use Waze if you knew where you were going. Just the week before her accident, we went up to Seth and Lisa's in Connecticut and we had a long discussion about the route from the house to I-95. And she was convinced that her route was the best, regardless of the conditions we set out as examples. When Seth and Lisa and Talia came down to the hospital on the day of her surgery, Seth drove in a different car than Lisa and Talia. Seth used Waze, got to the hospital 3 minutes before them. And I so wanted to tell her about it after the surgery, but the opportunity never presented itself. But I did get to talk about it at her funeral. Joan was intensely loyal. She'd do anything for people in her orbit, and once you were in her orbit, you were there forever. She had an aunt, the wife of one of her father's brothers, who was the last of that generation, who unwittingly treated my mother badly for many years. Joan visited her regularly and brought her food from the old country anyway. On one such visit, she brought a cake called boulangina. Her aunt looked at the cake and said, "Boulangina? I've always hated boulangina." But my mother never stopped visiting her. She didn't know any other way. And the line of boulangina became a long-running joke in our family. But there are countless people in the community who received meals from her over the years. It was something that she was compelled to do by some hidden force within her. She was a great cook. My father used to frequently say, "Joan's seconds are better than most people's firsts." We've been eating meals she prepared and frozen. The other night we had her meatloaf, and we found that one last loaf of manda bread, which we've been doling out like gold. She made great mashed potatoes and loved them so much that she used to tell us that she wanted to be buried in mashed potatoes. Sadly, we were not able to accommodate this. She told it like it is. When I left for college, she said, "We love you, but we're glad you're leaving." Another time we were discussing the many injuries I sustained when I was younger and the amount of metal that I had in my body. And she looked at me and said, "I made this perfect baby, and you went and messed it up." Although she used a much more colorful word than messed. It was the only time I ever heard her use that word. And it's not synagogue appropriate. We joked that she never had much of a filter, but she lost it completely when she got past a certain age. She wasn't afraid to play the old lady card and didn't mind the freedom that came with it. So when I went off to college, my mother hated the thought of her being away from family on Shabbat. So she started calling her every Friday afternoon, which subsequently turned into the Shabbat Shalom call to all four of her granddaughters. There was a period when she would rarely talk to all four on a given Shabbat, but over the last few years, the girls were great about either picking up the phone right away when she called or calling her right back. And when I checked in on Friday evenings and asked for a count, she was always happiest when she could report that she'd spoken to all four and give me an update to see if she learned anything that I didn't already know. Joan was amazingly vigorous. Before COVID, she was going to the JCC for water aerobics usually 4 times a week, and was frustrated when she was locked down not to have that outlet. After a few months, she dug up an old exercise tank and started working out in front of the TV. But the first time she did it, she could only go for 15 minutes. When I checked in with her about it again about a month or 2 later, she was up to 40 minutes and was doing it 4 times a week. She was so brave. She lived her life with resolve, and she ended it that way as well. We discussed the options briefly before the surgery, and she understood what was ahead, but faced the reality with courage. As a nurse for 45 years, she recognized the outcome of the surgery and knew that she was facing a monumental rehab, and that she wasn't going to be productive. People were going to have to help her instead of her helping people, and she just wasn't interested in signing up for that. She made her decision, and she went out on her terms. Seth, Miriam, and I were all lucky and all able to get into the emergency room before her surgery, and we felt so lucky to be able to see her and talk to her and tell her once again how much we loved her. She spoke to Lisa and all 4 granddaughters as well. As Seth said, there was so much more to say, but nothing was left unsaid. So it's incumbent upon all of us to carry on her legacy of Tikkun Olam. Joan believed in helping people and repairing the world, and we've all been struck by the outpouring of love for her and how many people she touched. She set an example for all, and she will be sorely missed.
This is Anna coming up to the Bima to speak about her grandma.
Some of my earliest memories of Omi are here in this building, sitting on the floor during services, playing with toys from the vinyl bag covered in soldiers that she brought along just to entertain me. She was my only grandmother, and for almost 40 years, I was her only grandchild. It's hard to wrap my mind around what happened the past few weeks. How on one hand, when you have someone in your life who's lived that long, you know that every conversation and every visit and every Shabbat call might be the last. But on the other hand, she seemed indestructible, someone we joked would outlive us all. And after a year of separation, a year of grief, at a time when my social media is full of reunions with grandparents for the first time in a year or more, my reunion with Omi was at her hospital bed, unable to speak, but holding my hand. It's hard to accept that that was the last time I'll see her, that she won't be calling me every Friday, that this will be the last day I spend at 25 Mulwood Oaks. Omi has been the biggest constant in my life, a rock, and not just to me. Omi was beloved on a scale that's hard to comprehend, because she loved on a scale that's hard to comprehend. My future mother-in-law read her book and spoke to her for several hours on the phone like she was talking to a celebrity. It was a privilege to know her, let alone be descended from her. Omi was one of the kindest and most giving people anyone could ever meet, but she was also a tough cookie. Some of my favorite recent memories of her are from the last few Passovers, where she would sit next to us at the end of the table and heckle whoever was leading the Seder. Last week, I had a dream that she was sitting there with us again. Even though her passing was sudden, we can all take comfort in the fact that she lived a long, full life and was able to fulfill her wish of passing peacefully at home, her sons by her side, and that we all got a chance to tell her how much we loved her. And 2 weeks ago, we all gathered together to have one last Seder at her house, eating the same recipes she's made my entire life, feeling her presence even in her absence.
We'll now hear from Isabel.
I'd like to start with mentioning people of service, those whose lives are dedicated to caring for others. Some do this with a hint of resentment or sacrifice, and the duty is a burden. However, there are other people who have found their place in the universe through giving. There's a quote from Khalil Gibran. Sorry, I gotta come down. Work is love made visible, and if you cannot work with love, but only with distaste, it is better you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms of those who work with joy. Omi is one of those joyful people whose cup was full enough of comfort and love to share without losing a piece of herself. She dedicated so much of herself as a nurse, as a mother, and an aunt, and a grandmother, and as a community member. And I'm humbled to even consider how many lives she touched. Though I'm full of emotion, it doesn't really feel like sadness necessarily. It is just overwhelmed with the weight of her life. I feel like Omi knew me, not just as a little girl or as a granddaughter, but the adult that I've grown into. And I feel like I knew Omi beyond the archetypal grandmother, but as Joan, or maybe even as Hannah. I can say, in all honesty, that we've grown much closer since her 90th birthday. Our Friday evening calls growing longer and more eclectic. I'd be sad this came so late in her life, but it took me a long time to truly grapple with what it meant to have a meaningful, mutual relationship with my grandmother beyond noodle bread and meatballs. And I know I made it there at the end. The last time I saw Omi, we were in the hospital. Even there, she had a perfect manicure, and we were talking to her. And even though she could hear us, she wasn't able to speak. A few times she tried to get out some words, but the sound just wasn't coming. I leaned in very close to try and hear, and as I did that, she reached up and kissed my ear. I cried leaving the hospital, but it was tears of joy. I'm so happy to have seen her again. It's a realized relationship, and I love Omi so much, and I really feel like she will be with me for the rest of my life.
In a few moments, we'll hear from Talia.
Love. A few weeks ago, I was searching for a summer internship, and Omi connected me with someone she knew from Temple. When I called and was thanking him for speaking to me, the first thing he said was, "Of course, I would do anything for your grandparents." This is a sentiment I've heard often. My grandparents were the type of people you would do anything for, as they would do anything for everyone else. As a grandmother, she was everything you could ever want a grandmother to be. There was cake for breakfast, cards for every occasion, a lifetime membership to Padasa, and endless love and warmth. She took us to musicals on the beach, and she taught us how to walk like New Yorkers. Nobody walked faster than her. Even when she started with a cane, she still kept up. I'll always appreciate how much time we got to spend with her as children. We had our Wednesday night dinners in the city, an afternoon spent in Fort Washington going for her button collection. But if I'm honest, some of my favorite memories have only come from the last few years. I had the chance to learn more about her life and family in Prague, her cousin Helen's 90th birthday, which was an absolute rager. We met only at Penn Station, and then we went to a coffee shop until the party, where she, of course, quizzed me on the family tree. I got to see and appreciate more of her dry sense of humor. I was living in DC for the past few years, and she sent me this card for my birthday this year. It has Statue of Liberty and Lincoln. On the outside it says, "Happy birthday to someone who's a national treasure." The inside it says, "Sadly, Congress has allocated no funds for your maintenance." And then she wrote, "So hope this helps." And she sent me a check, which I just thought was hilarious. 2 years ago, she came to DC for a visit for the weekend. I booked us an Airbnb in Adams Morgan, not realizing that I had booked it on the rowdiest street in all of DC, directly next to one of the loudest clubs in the entire city. And at 88, she just rolled with it. That trip was unbelievably special to me. To be honest, I think the highlight of the trip was when Omi had her first taco from a little vegetarian taco shop. She'd never had one before because they were never kosher, but I can assure you she was a huge fan. Taco moment aside, it meant the world to me to come to see where I lived and worked, and to meet all of my friends and see all of my favorite places. Omi was an incredibly important part of my life. As my friends will attest, I would interrupt anything to pick up one of her Friday Shabbat calls. She was simply the best. Omi saw some of the worst that humanity had to offer, but she was still relentless in trying to make the world a better place. She taught me what true service to your community and the world looks like. I will try my best to live up to this legacy every day.
In a few moments, we'll hear from Sasha.
So about 4 years ago, Omi delivered what I think must have been the only burn of Grandpa's funeral, when she said, "Darling, I couldn't hear a word you said because of all the crying, but people said it was a lovely speech." So I'm going to do my very, very hardest to honor her without too many tears. But if I'm being honest, I thought I might make it through the first sentence. But if I'm being honest, my heart is breaking. There's an unsaid soul, as everyone said, threatening to shatter the rest of us there. But I know that somewhat miraculously, my heart will remain intact. I know that it will because it knows, I know that it is truly surrounded by love on every side. And I learned how to love from my grandparents. Grandparents tend to be known for bestowing unconditional love upon their grandchildren, but I still think that ours did it the best. They loved in very different, often complementary ways, and I learned by watching. From Grandpa, I learned how to charm and entertain, how to enjoy and appreciate life and the people in it. But from Omi, I learned, and I'm still learning and will continue to learn for a very long time, how to really, and in every sense of the word, care for people. One of the most important moments in our relationship was when I wrote Romeo a letter in my senior fall of college. I've always had an easier time expressing my more serious emotions in writing. If I tried to just verbalize them, they tended to come out veiled in sarcasm. So I wrote only a thank you letter, thanking her for some of the things she'd done for me. I had a really difficult year, and I didn't know how to talk about it or how to ask for help. But that never stopped Joan. She would sit with me at the kitchen table and listen to my fears about the future and the guilt with which I viewed my own comfort against the suffering I saw around me. She told me about how she had moments where she looked back on her life and wondered whether she'd made the right decision in the coming years. She decided to at age 12 or so and never considered the other option. She told me how she'd sometimes wished she was born into different circumstances, but that none of us could control that, and we have a responsibility to make the best of what we've been given. She certainly had. She shared her experiences, listened to my fears and complaints without judgment. I wonder now what she may have been thinking during these conversations, but all that mattered and all that was ever felt or expressed was the love she was showing in her asking, in her listening, and in her unwavering attempts to find and work toward solutions to what felt to me to be unsolvable problems. But that was ultimately her point. That was where her stories always ended up. And it didn't matter what job you chose or how much privilege you were born with. What mattered were the relationships in your life and the love that was shared in those relationships. She would remind me that despite everything, despite what I thought, I was surrounded by people who loved me and always would. I turned to and found comfort in those conversations often, and very much still do. I know who would offer them up readily whenever she sensed I needed a reminder. That was what I thanked her for in that 2018 letter, for speaking mine and for never losing faith when I often did. The loyalty, honesty, and care present in each of those conversations was so completely characteristic of my own. And she really did have faith in me and in so many other people and things. I remember the catch in her voice when she called me to say she had read it. I think in my younger days, I had let independence come off as indifference, and she hadn't always felt appreciated by me. But that couldn't have been farther from what I thought. I was 21 then, and our relationship only continued to get stronger and closer from that point on. I think that's why this was all felt so particularly hard for me. I feel like in many ways, Joan and I were only just beginning to get to know each other. I was, and I'm only really now beginning to know myself, or to fully live out the things that I may have known for a long time. And Naomi was always there, ready to listen and eager to share. And I know that she felt the same way. I really can't describe the loss that I feel right now. It truly is an oversized hole straight through my heart. But luckily I learned how to love and how to be loved from someone with the biggest heart I've ever encountered. And those are lessons I'll keep with me as long as I live.
Thank you, Sasha. I'll take a moment. We're going to now try to look at the TV and go into Zoom, and we'll see if Joan's sister Doris is available to offer us some words.
Yes, I'm right here. My sister
Okay.
Joan. Okay, can I now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. My sister Joan I could not have had a better sister, and in my case, a better friend. But I have to say, with all her friends, I was the lucky one because I have the sister. Again, she was there for me when my husband died, and she was my rock, my pillar of strength. I could talk to her. Every Sunday night, we had this wonderful conversation about everything and everybody. Joan and I talked of great loves and life and being a nurse and finding Bernie and of course her 2 boys, Seth this and Daniel that, and her 4 wonderful granddaughters. There's no way you could talk to her on a Friday night because it was Shabbat Shalom with her girls. And she always said to me, let's see which one I can get to first. That was the most important thing for her. She was touched by everybody. And the one thing we shared, which we were so very, very lucky for, we had wonderful husbands, we have wonderful children, and we have great grandchildren. My only sad part was that I was not able to be in New York when she got sick. I will miss her every day. Hold on, I have to take a drink. She was my rock, my anchor, and my love, and I will miss her all my life. That's it.
Thank you, Doris. Thank you for your beautiful words. Joan is about 2 years older than Doris. Joan was the older sister. I'm going to call on Rita Shumsky. And while Rita's coming up, President of Temple Beth Israel, but in this particular moment, much more important, such a dear, dear friend of Joan Hulkower's. Just want to also take a moment to acknowledge Rhoda Smala, who's here. Rhoda is the international president of Hadassah, and knew Joan very well from Joan's involvements. Of course, as you all know, and you're hearing about how much Israel was so important to Joan, and we appreciate you being here. It means a lot to us, and we appreciate all you do for Hadassah and for the state of Israel. Thank you.
Everybody's spoken so eloquently and with great love for Joan. For sure, I never expected to be saying these words on this day about my friend. It's not always easy to develop close relationships as one ages. Although we know each other for years as friends and colleagues, Joan and I became very close in the last 7 or 8 years, and it was a blessing for both of us. We both spoke nurse, so that in itself cemented our relationship. We saw a lot of movies, thanks to Dean, ate a lot of dinners, went to museums, and most importantly, sat next to each other at TBI. I was in Israel for one of her trips for the whole 7 weeks and loved every minute with her and Bernie, and best of all, we giggled about stuff like we were 16 again. Most importantly, we were there for each other. I had the honor of speaking at Joan's 80th birthday party, which was really wonderful. I remember I remarked that Joan was the most selfless, giving, and loving person I knew. She truly cared about so many people and organizations, including Hadassah, which she made me join, and many of you, including myself, were bestowed with that love. Most of all, she loved her sons, her daughter-in-laws, and wonderful granddaughters, extended family, and of course, Bernie. The beauty about Joan's family is the love, caring, and respect they showed her, a reflection of Joan. Joan, my dear friend, you have been a very important person in my life, and I will miss you forever and think of you with great fondness and love.
Thank you, Rita. Lissa's going to come up to the bima and share her words and reflections.
What more can I possibly say? I could say that Joan defined the cliche of mother-in-law, and I loved, respected, and cared for her deeply, which I did, but that doesn't quite capture it. Over the past few weeks, I came to realize that if I wanted to honor Joan by leaving all of you with a vivid and lasting sense of what made her extraordinary, nothing I say can possibly be enough. So instead of passive praise of a life well lived, I want to create a living memorial to keep her energy alive.
When you think about the totality of her life, it's only fitting. A pop psychologist might say that she was constantly battling the forces of darkness that destroyed her idyllic childhood. That may not be far off. I once asked her why she so loved going to Israel, and she said, "It's the only place I've ever felt safe." Running hard from fear might explain why her energy was so powerful and so contagious. But it wasn't fear that made her special. Her soul was genuinely good. From family first to a long nursing career to her causes, Hadassah, TBI, Israel, NARAL, Soviet Jewry, and every other social justice cause that attracted her attention, she pumped loving energy into the world, and she didn't wait for it to be returned. She created a fortress of hope all around her, but it didn't keep people out, just the opposite. She sucked them into her happy vortex so that they could share the goodness she generated. She was centrifugal force. She couldn't be stopped. And most importantly, she inspired action by her example. So I hope you'll forgive the presumption, but it seemed right and fitting to ask something of you on her behalf. I'm calling it the Hanaruth Mitzvah Pledge. It's a 5-step program. First, and you'll understand why each of these is relevant, call someone that you care about, at least once a week, but especially on shocks. Don't wait for them to call you. Reach out. And if they don't call you back, call again. They'll learn, and before you know it, they'll be happily calling you. Be generous. Even if you only give $2, do it often to every Jewish, democratic, social justice cause that asks. It all adds up for good. Feed someone, preferably a home-cooked meal or check dessert. Raise your hand if you love murtai. We'll send out her mandel bread and other favorite recipes so everyone can spread the love. Fourth, take pictures. Memorialize all the good times. Keep close all around you on every wall of your house in millions of photo albums. All the people whose lives and special moments enrich yours. In their smiling faces, you'll see the love you've given reflected back a million times over. And finally, the Nike step. Just do something. You don't have to travel to Israel to volunteer at age 88, or lead a charitable organization, or embark on a 50-year nursing career. Just deliver some food to a homeless shelter. Visit someone who's down, but do it. You'll be happy for having done so. Joan created a small but mighty army of people dedicated to making the world a better place. For anyone who loved her, was touched by her, cared for her, or was inspired by her example, enlist. I have. Every single day, I will do something, anything to make the world a kinder, more hopeful, more peaceful place for my special, beloved mother-in-law. The irrepressible, the indomitable, the exemplary Joan Hulkower.
Lizzie, you had a very tough task of following everyone else, and you really gave a beautiful speech, and thank you for the charge. Cantor Blum, are you available on Zoom? All right, hold on a moment, Cantor. I'm going to ask everyone in the congregation, in the sanctuary, and everyone on Zoom, if you're able to please rise for the memorial prayer.
אל מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המתן מנוחה נכונה, בצל כנפי השכינה. במעלות קדושים הטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת חנה רות בת אפרים ורג'ינה שהלכה לעולמה. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה. אנא, בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Joan Hulkower, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she always rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. And now together we'll recite the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, v'yalma divrah pirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kari v'imru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah me'orat v'olam olmei olmayah. Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yipar, Yitromah, Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalav, Shmei Dikudisha, Perichu, Le'ela Minkol, Birchata, Beshirata, Tushbechata, Venechemata, Miran Bialma, Vibru, Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu V'arko Yisrael, Vibru, Amen. V'aseh Shalom V'rama, U'yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'arko Yisrael, Vibru, Amen.
Amen.
May be seated for a moment. Just want to either inform or remind you of the Shiva and how it's working this week. Tonight there will be a Zoom Shiva. We sent the link out. It's the same link as this memorial service, and that's going to start at 8 p.m. And we're going to do Zoom Shivas also on Monday night and Tuesday night at 8 p.m. And then we hope to have, weather permitting, in-person Shivas here at TBI outside the building on Wednesday and Thursday from 3 to 5 p.m. If you have stories that you'd like to share, recollections you'd like to mention, you have a number of options. You can come to the in-person Shivas and see the family. On Zoom, we're going to be having some people will share words on tonight, Monday night, Tuesday night. So that's a possibility as well, although we're going to be watching the time so it doesn't get too late on any of those evenings. And of course, you can always reach out to the family and they'd love to hear your memories and your recollections. This concludes the memorial service. We end with the ancient words of our tradition, Hamakon Inachemetem, P'toch Sha'ar Zion Yerushalayim. Even though Jerusalem, thank God, is rebuilt, but it was destroyed almost 2,000 years ago, and the Jewish people never forgot it. And when someone comes and touches us so deeply, it's going to be passed on from generation to generation. We pray that you're comforted by God, you're comforted by one another, by your friends in the community, and let us all say, Amen. If you'd like to stay for a little bit and see the family, I think they're going to be staying for a little bit as well. Thank you.
Remember
when we had a party and we were there for a weekend. What was the occasion? Bernie's birthday. Bernie's birthday? I didn't know it was his anniversary. Couldn't remember why we were there. Yeah. Bernie's birthday. Yeah, that was a long weekend. Can you remember? Oh, yeah, we went from place to place. Right. Your house? Yeah. Yeah. Bring a bathing suit if you want. Yeah. All these instructions. We were glad. Everybody's watching. Oh, you're gonna miss her. I to go to the museum. Yes, love her so many years. You know, I was watching the film with her and of the one where the youth had stages. Oh, so I was giving that day and I loved her. She loved me so much. She was so happy for us. We had lunch in between. Yeah, I come in and then of course you'll be still continues to put out. Yes, I've been doing it.